Welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. When you're ready to transform your sales for today's transforming market, we've got you covered with your host, the queen of cold calling and founder of Salesology, award-winning author, speaker, sales trainer, and coach, Wendy Weiss.
Hi, welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. And I'm your host, Wendy Weiss. I am the founder of Salesology and creator of the Salesology prospecting method. I am also known as the queen of cold calling. And today, our very special guest is Andrew Quinn. He is the former Vice President of Sales Productivity and Enablement for HubSpot. And over his 14 years at HubSpot, he always focused on building strong sales teams and people development programs. And Andrew's mission has always been to enhance the capability of sales teams and leaders of rapidly growing organizations. He's a strategic leader that has spearheaded the development of high-quality training and leadership development programs that supported HubSpot's rapid growth from $6 million in revenue in 2009 when he joined to over $2 billion in revenue in 2023. So let me just repeat that. $6 million in revenue in 2009 when he joined to over $2 billion in revenue in 2023. Andrew has over 25 years of experience in sales, management, and training with Fortune 500 companies and startups, including Verizon, Microsoft, and BuyerZone. And he's an advisor to several startups, including Valor Performance and ConversionCoach. So welcome, Andrew Quinn.
It's great to be here, Wendy. I'm looking forward to sharing whatever wisdom I've got that can help your audience.
Okay. So let's begin at the beginning. How did you get into sales? How did you get into sales management? What led you to HubSpot?
Sure. So as far as sales is concerned, like any student graduating college, this was back in the late 80s. I was trying to think about what did I want to get involved in. I really liked talking to people, and I did some interviews on campus, and I started to realize that sales was the place to be. My first sales gig actually was selling Bose acoustic wave music systems door to door. I did that for about 6 months, and talk about cutting your teeth. I learned a lot in that 6-month window. Part of it was how not to make money. I was on a 1099 in that gig. And it was challenging. But what ended up happening is I was trying to sell one of those units to my neighbor who was a sales director for Yellow Pages advertising for 9X. And this is, again, back in the late 80s. And he's like, you should be selling advertising. So I ended up getting into Yellow Pages advertising sales. And I did that for 16 years in 2 different blocks of time. And it was a fantastic business. And I really fell in love with selling at the Yellow Pages. It was an interesting job because you were selling to all different kinds of small businesses. And whether it was, a dentist, a pizza shop, an auto repair place, an attorney, but all of them were trying to figure out how to reach their audience, right? How to draw more customers in. And really my entire career then was spent helping small companies through various types of marketing and advertising. And that's, believe it, my entire career has been in selling products that were associated with promoting a business. And that's how I got to HubSpot. I was doing sales management and sales training at Verizon. And one of my colleagues had gotten a job as a salesperson at HubSpot when it was a very early company. It was about 60 employees at the time. And they were casting around looking for somebody to start their sales training program. And this person named Julie Rosenberg, she said, hey, I know somebody at my former company that's great at this. I was very flattered about that, came in, went through the whole process, and I ended up doing 14 years at HubSpot and had some amazing experiences developing salespeople, which is something that I care deeply about. I think it's a very important profession that unfortunately I don't think gets the kind of attention that it should in in schools, like in college and things along those lines. It is what makes the world go round. Like nothing happens until something gets sold. And when that dawned on me, I'm like, this is where I want to be. And I've stayed in it the entire time.
Okay. I love what you said about developing salespeople, because I'm kind of on a mission to stamp out the myth of the born salesperson.
Absolutely.
And I cannot tell you how many prospects, clients I've spoken with over the years that think they've hired a born salesperson who's just going to rock it, and just because like they somehow intuitively know what to do and what to say, and they just like know everything. So that's not true, right?
It is not true. And I am firmly in your camp on that. The thing that was fascinating at HubSpot is that we were open to a variety of different people as candidates. I mean, we had people that were, Harvard MBAs that had never sold anything, but they wanted to be entrepreneurial, and we took a shot on them, and they were amazing salespeople. We had people that were, again, to your point, born salespeople, brought them in, did not do well in our business. And it was really, in my opinion, looking for people that had a couple of key attributes. We loved people that were precise in their language. They had good economy of language. They were well organized. They were industrious. They were intellectually curious, driven, right? And if you could find somebody that, again, was organized, industrious, curious, had strong communication skills, and also had resilience, right? They can bounce back. They can learn how to sell and be highly effective at it. So we weren't just looking for sort of the standard attributes that people typically look for in a salesperson, like somebody who's upbeat and gregarious and, has lots of energy and all that type of stuff. I think a lot of people think about that as the born salesperson. But a lot goes into this. And I would say a lot of companies on the buying side know what all the tricks are now. Like you can't do those sort of ham-handed sales techniques you used to be able to do 20 years ago. Everybody knows what they are. They see them coming from a mile away. You can't operate that way.
Agreed. So I'm curious, what is your step one when you've hired this industrious, organized, curious person? What is your step one in the training process?
So I look at it like they really need to understand the reason why they're there, right? So what is the purpose of this business that they've joined? Because ultimately, they're going to be the face of that out in the marketplace. So they need to genuinely understand and believe in why they're there. So that really, in my opinion, is the first step, is make sure they're abundantly clear on what this organization is all about, what the value proposition is that it brings to the marketplace, and how does that connect to you? And we start looking for that in the interview process, like trying to find people that are connecting to what we were trying to do. And if we found people that had those other attributes I discussed, and they connected with what we were trying to do, that's the first thing we reinforced when they joined the business. And that's the first thing I think they need to understand, because the only way they're ever going to be authentic on a sales call is if they believe what they're talking about. And I've sold things where I did not believe what I was selling. I got into it, like I believed it when I joined, and then I realized what I was selling it didn't work the way it was purported to work. That is the worst. And then I've sold things where I genuinely believe in what I'm selling. And it's a world of difference in the credibility you bring, the tone of your voice, the way that you interact with somebody. And that was one of the first steps, was just getting them to be clear on what we were doing, the value of it, and having them start to lock in their belief of it.
It's, I always say, if you don't believe in what you're doing or what you're selling, go find something else
Absolutely.
to do. So what did you do with those people that maybe just like for whatever reason didn't lock in, didn't resonate, didn't get it?
So it depends on where that became clear. So obviously in the interview process, if you can tell, that would wash them out. In training, what was interesting is I'm going to do a little bit of a side here. Like we thought really hard about what I would call baseline viability. In other words, when we're putting somebody in an onboarding and training program, what is the sort of minimum viable work they're able to do when they sit in the seat doing the job? Because they're not going to be proficient coming out of training. They're on a path to proficiency. But I need to get them to some base level of performance so they can sit in the seat and not immediately bother the person next to them going, what is it I have to do again? So in HubSpot, we had made the decision that we were going to invest 1 month of training time where they were solely going to be in training, not doing any, sales work, so to speak. But in that window of time, we watched them very closely. And there were a bunch of gates they had to get through, whether it was written tests they had to do, there was a product project they had to do. So they really felt the pain of a marketer. We sold marketing software. So we created a situation where they had to build a blog, build a website, create a social presence, essentially establish a business to really feel what it's like to use these tools as a digital marketer. And they had to present that at the end of training to demonstrate why they did what they did. And all the while, I had a series of evaluations that I would do where we're observing and using a rubric and scoring. And there are people that washed out because the rubber really met the road in that month. And you could tell if they sold you something in interview, but they weren't authentic in that training window. And we'd let them go. If they did not take seriously what they were doing, you could tell they weren't invested. Then once they get in the seat, obviously it's now they're ramping up and, you're looking for performance. You're looking for those early indicators. And we had an onboarding program and a ramp program where they had to hit certain gates. And if they didn't, again, they'd be, released from the business if they didn't make those numbers. So there was a series of, I would say, checkpoints along that ramp period to determine were they who they said they were, and could they do what they said they could do.
So I'm interested to know, in preparation for this interview, I asked you a whole bunch of questions. And
Sure.
One of the questions that I asked you was about wins that you had with your team. And I'm just going to read what you told me. You said they all center around scaling repeatable sales behaviors that yield successful and predictable sales outcomes. And so what I'm curious about, because sometimes working with salespeople is a little bit like herding cats.
Sure.
How do you get salespeople to do the repeatable sales behaviors?
So there were a couple of different ways that we did that. The most effective, in my opinion, was what I would call introducing FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. So I'll use a great example. So we were trying to reframe how we conducted discovery. And we had landed on this notion of something we called the inbound marketing assessment. Essentially, what a rep was going to do was book this opportunity to talk to a marketer about the things that we saw based on our expertise that might be off in the way that they're doing their online marketing. Now, we had a bit of an advantage because you can see that stuff, right? You could see how well they were SEO optimized. You could see the offers that they had on their website, so on and so forth. But the thing is, a lot of our salespeople weren't used to doing that type of discovery. So rather than just say, okay, we've come up with this new thing, we're now going to train everybody on it. We're going to hold you accountable to doing it. And then we're going to certify you against it and make sure everything's cool. Like, that just doesn't work because a salesperson essentially puts themselves on what I would call the path of least resistance to a dollar, right? They are the most measured role in a company. Their measurement is solely based on the revenue that they're producing, right? The MRR, however you want to classify it, deal size, profitability of the deal, whatever it is. they're going to keep running down that path. So if I train them on this new thing and say, this is the new thing, this is how you need to do it, they're going to go to the training class. They might try it once or twice. They're like, oh, this is harder than the way I was doing it. They're going to run right back down the path they were on. You would have invested all that training time, goes nowhere. So getting back to the FOMO thing. What we would do is I would go and I would find 10, maybe 15 sellers that were very, I would call beta tolerant. They wanted to try new things. They wanted to get better. And brought them all together, said, this is what we're thinking about, new discovery process. And we start having them try it. Now, they're all out on the sales floor. So it's a little bit more challenging now, right? Because we're in a more remote environment. At this point, we're all on a sales floor, all sitting together. And what happened is they're trying this new technique. They're getting further in their calls. The person sitting next to them goes, where did you get that? Where'd that come from? And you're like, oh, I'm part of this special project. We're working on a new discovery process. I can't really share the details yet. I don't know if you really want to try it yet. We haven't got it all baked. So what ended up happening is like everybody's now hearing this because it's seeded around the sales floor. And they're all starting to hear this happening. They're like, we want to get in on this. So it's like, great. As soon as we're ready to train you, we will. So we held back a little bit, not too much, but just enough that the demand built up. They all feel like they're missing out. So when we roll it out, they're like, yeah, I can't wait to get my hands on this thing. And we did that a bunch with a variety of different like motion changes that we had or value story changes. And it just really, it's funny. It's like this slow down to speed up thing, because you think that if I just train everybody at once, they'll all get it. They'll all go do it. But it ends up taking twice as long because you got to retrain them. Follow me?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And FOMO for our audience, just in case, fear of missing out. Yeah, that was very, very clever. Very, very clever.
Yeah, it worked.
It's the resistance to sometimes, we say as salespeople that biggest barrier is the status quo, that the prospect, it's hard to get people to get prospects to make changes, but really it's the same thing with salespeople, that it's Absolutely. The status quo, like they're doing something, they want to keep doing it. So that
I can't tell you how many salespeople I've encountered where, let's say, the market has shifted, and the way they were going to market, the way they were putting value on the table, the way they were trying to move deals forward and close them, no longer worked as effectively because something has changed. And I can't tell you how many people I've seen. I'm sure you've seen this yourself. They double down on what they used to do, convinced it will work again, and they actually go even further into the slump because they're unwilling to say, I got to get on a new path. I want my old path to work. And they just keep investing in the old path. And sometimes they invest so hard, they end up leaving the business because they can't get there. And it's a shame when that happens, but I've seen it a lot.
Absolutely. One of my old ballet teachers for our audience, and I don't know if you know this, Andrew, my first career was I danced in a ballet company. But one of my old teachers used to say when we were working on turns, on pirouettes, if you fall down, you're doing it wrong. And it is also true in sales. If what you are doing isn't working, it's time to do something else.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so we are going to pause now for a word from our sponsor. When we come back, Andrew, I want to hold your feet to the fire about some of the things that drove you a little bit crazy about managing a sales team, and how to fix those things for our audience, if some of these same things drive them crazy too.
Look forward to it.
So now a word from our sponsor, the Salesology Vault. Just about every guest that I've interviewed on the Salesology Conversations with Sales Leaders podcast has had a free gift for our listeners. So what we've done is we've taken all of those gifts and put them all in one place just for you. We call it the Salesology Vault, and it's packed full of free gifts from sales leaders, sales experts, marketing gurus, revenue generation experts, and we add another gift every single week. So every time we release a podcast, every Monday, we add a gift. You can log in as often as you'd like and download as many gifts as you'd like. It's all free. So go to bit.ly/gift vault, or the link to the Salesology Vault is in the show notes. After you finish listening to this podcast, go to the notes, click on the link, download your gifts. You'll be glad you did. And I am back with Andrew Quinn, who is the former Vice President of Sales Productivity and Enablement for HubSpot. So one of the questions, Andrew, that I asked you in preparation to doing this interview was, what drives you crazy about managing a sales team? And I know often when I'm speaking with clients, there are things that drive them crazy. So what was it that made you a little bit nuts when it came to managing a sales team?
There are a couple of things that stand out to me. One was I would say, unreasonable expectations from leadership. You know, when they're not in there and they're pushing on you to deliver a certain thing from the team, and for whatever reason, the market isn't there, or whatever is getting in the way. And what is getting in the way is legitimate. And, you know, you're basically pushed to make the number, even though the number is not real and the number's not going to happen. And no one's willing to admit that the number's not going to happen. And you get into your KPI meeting and everyone knows these numbers aren't real and management's just pulling them out of the air. Fortunately, we didn't operate that way at HubSpot. It was really quite remarkable. So we didn't have a lot of that going on. But when I worked for Verizon, there was a lot of that, and it was incredibly frustrating. Another thing is...
Let me stop you for a moment, because this is a teachable moment for our audience that wanting to scale your business, you have to have a realistic, what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have to have a realistic conversation with your sales manager, sales team, and base your numbers on reality and not something else.
Absolutely. Like what was really interesting is HubSpot, essentially coming out of MIT, a lot of the leaders in that organization, the CEO, the other co-founder, like Brian Halligan, Dharmesh, Mark Roberge, Mike Volpe, head of marketing, they were all MIT Sloan people. So it really came down to the data. It was like, what is the math to scale this business? What is it going to take to get to that math number? And is that math number real? And every month, like, we would do a KPI meeting where it was more based in reality of, yep, that's not going to happen. So how do we readjust, or what has to happen or change so that that number can be real, as opposed to just, sorry, it's your job as a sales manager. You need to go deliver that number by hook or by crook. Now, what I think forced that to a degree was some of the dynamics of the SaaS business, right? Software as a service. Churn is a real problem in that business. So if you don't sell good fit deals that are going to stick and really stay with the subscription for the payback period, like, you could sign up tons of deals, and if they wash out 90 days later, like, that's terrible for the business. And we had some people that did that, where they were closing 30 deals a month, and it was remarkable, but their retention rate was terrible. So it actually was hurting the business. And I remember that clearly when that became a picture, around 2000, mid 2009, early 2010. We had finally had, some ways to analyze data where it became clear that the reps that actually were selling less, but deals that stuck, were way more valuable to the business. And it changed that mindset a lot early on. And I think it's vital to think that way, because to just pull a number out that you want to hit it and just expect people to go deliver on it, I never see that working in a way that gets everybody inspired to win. Because salespeople need to feel like they're winning. And if they got a number in front of them they can't win against, where's the motivation come from?
aspirational, a little bit of a stretch, but realistic, so that it's actually achievable.
Yeah, like we ended up creating a culture where doing 100% of your number actually wasn't succeeding. Like, because we set it up so that you could beat your number, but you really weren't doing the job unless you were doing 125% of your number. And there was a lot of incentives attached to doing that. But it ended up creating this environment where people felt like they weren't actually living up to their obligation unless they were doing 125% of their number. So they felt like they were winning. They got past the initial hurdle, and then they would see others doing 150, 175, and they're like, geez, I'm not even getting a 125. Like, it created this whole feeling of we're winning. And it worked. I really respect, Mark Roberge, Hunter Madeley, who was the CRO that came in after Mark, that really created that culture inside the organization, which is very different than most sales organizations.
Yeah, a lot of sales organizations are like, you're not making your numbers, so now we're going to train you, or like as training as punishment, kind of.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's pretty cool. So what's the second thing that drove you a little bit crazy?
The second thing is dealing with sales reps that they made a decision to get into this, and then they're unwilling to do the things that are actually going to help them succeed. Like you brought it up earlier, the person that seems to know everything, that's going to, they're a born salesperson, they're going to knock the cover off the ball. Like those people that you want to call them uncoachable or whatever it is, like they've chosen to get into this profession, and you're trying to help them develop, again, those repeatable behaviors. And those behaviors aren't necessarily the things they say. They might be the way that they block their day, the way they organize their time, the way that they, think about how to efficiently group different activities so they're not like one of the worst things, right, is when I make my outbound call. Let's say I get somebody on the phone. I then write up my notes. I then send my follow-up email, and then I book my follow-up appointment. Like that whole sequence might take a half an hour. If I'm in calling mode, stay in calling mode, right? If I'm in email writing mode, stay in email writing mode. Like block those things that are similar. You get more done that way. And people that will not change to do the things that actually will allow them to be successful in a role they've chosen. I always found that very frustrating. So I worked hard to not hire people like that.
Yes, it's very frustrating. To me, it's very confusing. I have a client, it's got 4 salespeople. 3 of them use a particular process and script, and the 4th one wings it. And so the 3 are setting a lot of appointments for the owner of the company, which is their job, their business development people. And then the 4th one doesn't set any appointments. And every once in a while he uses the script and then he sets an appointment.
Yeah, but it's not his fault that the appointments aren't happening.
Like, no,
that's
it's not
the
his
other
fault.
side of that frustration. It's like, right. It's not his fault. It's like, but we have figured out the repeatable set of behaviors that will yield the outcome that you want. Yet you refuse to do that. And somehow that's the company's problem.
Yeah. Well, as my ballet teacher said, if you fall down, you're doing it wrong.
Right.
Yeah. So, what are the steps? When a salesperson, when I asked you the questions in preparation for this interview, one of the things that you said was about your HubSpot process, that you needed to have the discovery call and then the demo.
Yes.
And that sometimes you had people that tried to squish it together, and it didn't work so well. Can you tell us a little bit about how you arrived at the conclusion that you needed to do the discovery call and then you needed to do the demo, 2 separate things, versus making it all one call? How did you arrive at that realization?
Absolutely. So I'll say in sales in general, there's a fairly similar set of steps, right? You're going to have to do some kind of research, get yourself prepared. You're going to make your outreach, your prospecting sequence, whatever that is. You're going to connect with somebody, have an initial conversation. From there, you're going to have to do some kind of discovery, some type of value presentation, and some sort of closing sequence, right, where you're asking for the order. Some in the value presentation might have a recommendation attached to it. Like there's different things, but it's the general flow. And there are certain sales where, yeah, you can do a one-call close. Like you can prepare, you can get them on the phone, you can run a light discovery, you can just demonstrate your value and sell something. Like there's plenty of products that can sell that way. For us, we're in a unique situation where we would be able to identify for a marketer things that might not be right. And our attention was to try and get on what we would call this inbound marketing assessment, which is essentially a discovery call. The thing is, with HubSpot, there were a lot of different angles with which the product could be used. And you had no way of knowing what was the most valuable way to go about it. For example, like we had top of the funnel tools, SEO tools that would help you build traffic to your website, would allow you to get a lot more visits, things along those lines. And so if you're interested in lead generation, well, if you're not getting any visits to your website, the lead generation tools don't matter because you can't convert traffic that doesn't exist, right? So you're trying to figure out which problem do they have that needs to be solved first. And you can't really do that deeply if you're doing a light discovery and then dropping right into a demo, because what you're usually going to do is a stock demo, and then it's not customized to the real issue that they've got, because you're never going to uncover that quick enough. So we have found that if we spent the time to really understand what is this business trying to accomplish, and we had this thing we came up with called GPCT. It stands for goal, plan, challenge, and timeline. Like as a business, what are you trying to do? What's your plan to get there? What might get in the way of that plan? What are things that if it went wrong, it's not going to work? And how quickly does this all need to come together for you? How soon will you know whether or not it's not going to work? Like if we uncovered all that, we could then customize a demonstration of the product that would line up much tighter to what they were trying to accomplish and the things they were afraid would go wrong that allowed us to create a better story. And it's interesting. We had done a lot of work on this, and we found out that the people that did the discovery and the demo separately had about a 65% better close rate than those that tried to do them at the same time. Did a light demo, went right into, did a light discovery right into demo. People that split it up were closing 65% better because they were splitting them apart. Again, it goes to that like slow down to speed up thing, because I think I'm going faster when I'm doing my discovery and demo in the same call. But invariably, I would end up doing a second demo, maybe a third demo, because they didn't quite get it the first time, or there were objections associated with it, so on and so forth. So the math bore it out, and it made a huge difference in the business.
Well, you always have to tie what the prospect's problem is to what you're selling. And if the prospect is probably not going to make that connection on their own. So you need to be able to make that connection for them.
Yeah, and you haven't really built up enough trust yet either. Like that was part of the purpose in the inbound marketing assessment, was to build some trust with the prospect. One of the things that, we used to talk about with the prospect would be something along the lines of like the way the rep was paid. Because, for us, like the reps would get clawed back if the account churned before 1 year. So like I might have closed that deal, but if that account churns in 6 months because they're not seeing value, you're getting clawed back on that. So we would use that in the discovery process and say, what's your assumption about how I'm most likely paid by HubSpot, right? And they said, well, certainly you're on commission, so you're going to try to sell me stuff. Like, actually, that's not how it works. Like, just to sell you anything doesn't do me any good. You need to buy this thing and you need to stick for at least a year. So I'm looking at you just as critically as you're looking at me to see if this is going to work. Because if I don't think it's going to work for you, I'm not going to sell it to you, because they're just going to pull the money back from me if I sell this to you and it doesn't work and you're like, this was terrible. Andrew completely like flim-flammed me on this deal. Like, that does me no good. So I want to tell you that up front, so you know that we're on the same side here. Like, it worked magically. Now, you have to have that type of dynamic in the compensation of your organization. But that transparency helped to build that trust, which then allowed them to be more candid with what they're actually facing, the issues they've got, which then allows us to tailor a better demonstration, which then yielded better close outcomes.
I love that. That was also very clever. So Andrew, where can people want to get in touch with you? Where can they find you?
Sure, they can find me on LinkedIn.
Okay, and we have the link to Andrew's LinkedIn profile. It is in the show notes. So if you want to get in touch with Andrew as soon as you finish listening to this podcast, go to the show notes, click on the link. Andrew, will you put your hand over your heart and promise me that you will come back again? Because this has been a really fabulous and interesting conversation.
Absolutely, Wendy. I'd be more than happy to do that. And I actually do have a little something for the audience. If they're interested in how to build an onboarding program for a scaling business, around sales, like how do you run sales training? I wrote a very in-depth article for Matrix Partners, which is one of the early VC investors in our business. And David Skock, one of the VCs, has a website called For Entrepreneurs. If you look up forentrepreneurs.com/onboarding, you'll find a very in-depth explanation of how we ran that sales training function in HubSpot, because David's a big believer in a scaling business. The onboarding and training is essential to making that organization ramp and scale. So it's a real good rendering of how we did it at HubSpot.
Wonderful. And for our audience, in case you didn't write that down, we're going to post the link in the show notes. So as soon as you finish listening to this podcast, go to the show notes, click on the link. And you have been listening to Salesology, Conversations with Sales Leaders, with my very special guest, Andrew Quinn, who is the former Vice President of Sales Productivity and Enablement for HubSpot. And if you found value in listening to today's podcast, then please think about one business owner, one entrepreneur, one sales leader, somebody that you know that you think might also find value in listening to today's podcast. And please do share the link with them. And until we meet again, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, really large bills.
You've been listening to Salesology, Conversations with Sales Leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. Be sure to follow so that you don't miss a single episode. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share it with your friends. Tune in every week for more exciting insights and wisdom on transforming sales. And until next time, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, very large bills.